Hey, everyone. It's your host, Ruby. Welcome back to Strange Mind 6 and to the story that we've been reading, The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. Hope you guys are all having a good day, and if not, try to look on the bright side and know that tomorrow's another day, that as long as you keep on pushing forward, nothing can stop you. Now, grab your snacks, grab your drink, sit back, try to relax, and let's get into chapter 13. Oh, and before I forget, if you could please hit that like button for me, and if you are not subscribed yet, please subscribe. I would truly appreciate it. Now, let's get into chapter 13, shall we? Chubbs and Zoo were not happy to be woken up at 5:30 a.m., and even less enthusiastic about Liam forcing them to make the bed while we freshened up in the bathroom and replaced the used towels. Not exactly clean of us, but it was much better than alerting the management they had hosted a bunch of squatters for the night. Chubbs took one look at me as he marched out to the minivan and stopped dead in his track. He wore this thought plain as day on his face. "You're still here?" I shrugged. "Deal with it." He shook his head and let out another one of his sighs. Once we were settled, Zoo and Chubbs in the middle seats, we all watched as Liam closed the hotel room door, cup of crappy hotel coffee in hand. That's right, I thought, glancing at Zoo out of the corner of my eye. She had curled up on her seat and was using her gloved hand as a pillow. Didn't get much sleep, did he? Liam ran through his usual routine of checking the mirror's position, adjusting the recline of his seat, buckling himself in, and turning the keys in the ignition. But Liam's next order of business upon returning to the minivan wasn't to answer any of the number of questions Chubbs threw his way about where we were going. He waited until his friend was good and snoring before calling back to me. "Can you read a map?" The embarrassment and shame that washed through me painted my face red. "No, sorry. Wasn't that something your dad was supposed to teach you eventually?" "No problem." Liam patted the empty passenger seat. "I'll teach you later, but for now, I just need someone to watch the signs for me. Come on up to the co-pilot chair." I jerked a thumb in the direction of Chubbs. Liam only shook his head. "Are you kidding me? Yesterday he thought a mailbox was a clown." I unbuckled my seatbelt with a sigh as I climbed over Chubb's outstretched legs to the front. I glanced over my shoulder, my eyes going to his two small glasses. Is his eyesight really that bad? "Worse," Liam said. So right after we got the hell out of Caldona, we broke into this house to spend the night, right? I woke up in the middle of the night hearing the most awful noise, some kid's baseball bat, thinking I was going to have to beat someone's head in for us to make a clean getaway. Then I saw what was sitting at the bottom of the drained pool. No way, I said. Way, he confirmed. Hawkeye had gone out to relieve himself and had somehow missed the giant gaping hole in the ground, twisted his ankle, and couldn't climb out of the deep end. I tried so hard not to laugh, but it was impossible. The mental image was just too damn good. Liam reached over and switched on the radio, letting me choose the station. He seemed satisfied with my decision to stay with the Who. With the window down all the way, I leaned out, resting my chin on my hands. The morning air was warm, licked by the first rays of sunlight. When I looked up past the very tip-top of the wild trees, there was nothing but blue sky. A small sound, a ghost of a sigh, was released behind us. Both Liam and I turned to look at Zoo's sleeping face. "Did we wake you up last night?" he asked. "I caught a little of it," I said. "Does she have a lot of nightmares?" "In the few weeks I've known her, it's been an every other night thing. Sometimes she dreams about Caldona, and I can talk her down, but I never know what to say about her family. I swear, if I ever meet her parents, I'm going to..." His voice trailed off, but the anger coated them had given the air a palpable charge. "What did they do to her?" "Gave her away because they were afraid of her," he said. "Like me and Chubbs. Our folks tried to keep us hidden, and that's when we went to the camp late. Zoo's parents actually sent her away when she short-circuited her dad's car in the middle of the freeway. Oh, God. They sent her during the first official collection." He propped an elbow along the door panel and leaned his face against his hand. His redskin's cap hid his eyes from view. "I forgot you missed this." I waited for him to explain. It was after most people our age had already been taken or were in hiding. The government issued a notice that any parents who didn't feel safe or capable of taking care of their kiddos could send them to school on a specific morning, and the PSI, Special Forces, would be there to collect them for rehabilitation. Kept it all very hush-hush to avoid upsetting the children or inciting them to misbehave. I rubbed my forehead, trying to force out the images flittering through my mind. Did she actually tell you this? Tell me. Tell me, you mean? He kept his eyes straight ahead, but I saw his hand choke the wheel. No. She wrote it out in bits and pieces. I haven't heard her say a single word since the breakout. I finished. I felt relieved in spite of everything I knew. It's a choice, then, not something they did to her. No, it has everything to do with what they did, and it's not a choice, Liam said. I think maybe the most frustrating feeling in the world is to have something to say but not know how to put it into words. To have lived through something but not be able to get it out. of you before it festers. I mean, you're right. She can talk, and maybe one day she will, after everything I've put her through about what happened. I just don't know. It was the most frustrating feeling in the world, second only to the inherent helplessness that came with being trapped in a camp. All of your decisions made for you. After what had happened with Sam, I didn't say a word for almost a year. There was just no way to vocalize that kind of pain. The radio jumped as we lost the station's signal, switching through a Spanish language channel, then to one with classical music, before finally settling on the dry, nasally voice of a man reading the news. To inform you that initial reports indicate that 4 separate explosions were set off this morning in Manhattan's subway. Liam's finger shot out to switch the channel, but I changed it right back. Through confirmation has been slow to come out of the city. We believe these explosions were not nuclear or biological in nature and were concentrated around Midtown, where President Gray was rumored to be in hiding after the most recent attempt on his life. League, West Coast, or fake. Chubb's sleepy voice floated up behind us. Our sources indicate that President Gray and his cabinet believe this to be the work of the Federal Coalition. Federal Coalition? I repeated. West Coast, the boys answered together. Chubbs elaborated. Based out of Los Angeles, they're the section of the government that survived the D.C. bombings and weren't crazy about the idea of Gray disregarding the whole 2-term limit they had set up. They're mostly talking heads since the military sided with Gray, obviously. Why is Gray in New York and not Washington? I asked. They're still rebuilding the Capitol and the White House. Only it's not going so well since, they defaulted on all their debt, Liam said. He spread the government out between Virginia and New York for its protection to make sure none of the fugitive PSI groups or the League got any ideas about wiping it all out at once. So the Federal Coalition, they're against the camps, the reform programs? Chubb sighed a little. Hate to break it to you, Green, but something you'll learn pretty fast is that we're not exactly a priority to anyone right now. Everyone's more focused on the fact that the country is broke as a joke. Who do we like then? I pressed. We like us, Liam said after a while, and that's about it. There were apparently only 2 restaurant chains left in the state of Virginia, or at least the western half of it, Cracker Barrel and Waffle House, and one wasn't open before 9 o'clock in the morning. Thank goodness, Liam said in a solemn voice as he parked a short distance away from the Waffle House. I don't know how we would have chosen between these 2 fine culinary establishments. He had nominated himself to order whatever food he could afford with $20, but refused when I asked if he wanted me to go with him. Zoo held up a small notebook, waving it to his attention as he stepped outside. Done already? She nodded. Why don't you have Chubbs check your answers? No, don't make that face. He's better at math than I am anyway. You're damn right I am, Chubbs said, without looking up from his book. Zoo flipped the flimsy notebook open to a blank page and scribbled something down. When she held it up for him to see, Liam grinned. Whoa, whoa, long division? I think you're getting ahead of yourself, ma'am. You still haven't conquered your double-digit multiplying. I watched him hop out of the minivan, a flare of annoyance shooting up from my core. All of this would have been so much easier if he wasn't the only one of us who looked old enough to pass for 20. At least I'd feel a lot better knowing one of us could be out there watching his back. Liam must have felt my gaze burning through the back of his jacket because he stopped and turned to wave before disappearing around the corner. You really have to stop encouraging him, Chubbs was saying to Zoo. I glanced back, watching as he used the blunt end of her pencil to follow lines of numbers on the page. He needs to accept reality at some point. Zoo's face scrunched up, twisting like a piece of hard lemon candy was stuck on her tongue. She punched him in the shoulder. I'm sorry, he said, but clearly wasn't. It's just a waste of time and energy to teach you this stuff when you're never going to get a chance to use it. You don't know that, I said, flashing Zoo a reassuring smile. I added, you'll be ahead of everyone else your age by the time things go back to normal. When had I started believing in normal anyway? Everything I had been through up to that point could only be used as support for Chubb's argument. He was right, even if I didn't want to admit it. You know what I'd be doing if things were normal? Chubbs said. I'd be picking which college I was going to attend later this fall. I'd have taken my SATs, gone to football games and prom, taken chemistry. His voice trailed off, but I picked up the frayed ends of his thought all the same. How could I not? These were the exact thoughts. These were the exact things I thought about when I let myself get to that dark place. The dark place of should be or could have been. My mom said once that education was a privilege not afforded to everyone, but she was wrong. It wasn't a privilege. It was our right. We had the right to a future. Zoo sensed the shift of mood. She looked between us, lips moving silently. We needed a change of subject. I said, crossing my arms over my chest and leaning back against the seat. Like you would have ever gone to a football game. Hey, I resent that. Chubbs handed Zoo her notebook. Here, you need to work on your nines. When he turned back to me, it was with a disapproving look. I can't believe you, of all people, fell for his cotton candy dreams. What's that supposed to mean? You were in Thurman for what, 5 years? 6, I corrected. And you're missing the point. It's not that I believe in what Lee's saying. It's that I hope he's right. I really, really hope he's right. Because what's the alternative? We're stuck hiding out until their generation dies off. We flee to Canada. Good luck with that, Chubb said. Both Canada and Mexico have built walls to keep us out, and them in, because they thought Ian was a contagious disease. No, because they've hated us all along and were only looking for the right excuse to keep our fat asses and fanny packs out of their country forever. Liam chose the exact moment to reappear, 4 styrofoam containers balanced between his hands. He was moving fast, almost at a run. I leaned over and popped the door open for him, and he all but dumped the containers on my lap. Oh God, what now? Whoa, I began, trying to keep the hot food from spilling all over my legs and seat. Betty's engine started with a snarl, and suddenly we were rocketing backwards, with the sheet blocking the back window. Liam had to rely on using the side mirrors to navigate us down the road and up into the small back alley that divided the Waffle House from an abandoned jewelry consignment store. I braced an elbow against the door as he steered the old minivan past the dumpsters to the cramped employee parking lot tucked away in a dead end around the corner. The minivan lurched to a stop, throwing all 4 of us forward. "We're going to stay here for a little while," he announced to our terrified faces. "Don't panic, but I think it'll just be safer here for a bit." "You saw her?" It wasn't a question. Chubbs already knew the answer before he asked. "Lady Jane." Liam rubbed the back of his neck as he leaned forward. He had left the nose of the minivan out far enough so we could peer around Waffle House's wall to see down the alley. "Yeah, I'm pretty sure." How was it possible that she had already caught up with us? "Holy hell," Chubb squawked. "I'm pretty sure, or definitely sure." After a moment, Liam answered, "Definitely sure. She's got a new set of wheels, a white truck, but I'd recognize that smug face anywhere." "Did she see you?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. "Probably not, otherwise she and whoever her new boy toy is would have tried to run me down. They drove by just as I was leaving." I craned my neck forward, trying to see far enough past the wall of the restaurant to the alley opening. As if on cue, a glinting white truck rolled by, 2 dark figures in the front seats. Liam and I flew back against our seats at the exact same moment, looking at each other in alarm. I don't think either of us took a breath until we were sure no one was coming down the alley to investigate. He cleared his throat. How about you pass out the food? I'll just check." "Liam Michael Stewart," Chubb's voice thundered from the back seat. "If you step 1 foot out of this minivan, I will order Green to run you down with it." "Don't think I won't," I warned, knowing exactly what Liam wanted to do, go out and risk his neck by walking down the alley to make sure the coast was clear. When I handed him a styrofoam container, he slumped back to his seat, accepting defeat. Liam had ordered each of us a simple meal of scrambled eggs, bacon, and 2 pancakes without syrup. The others dug in with gusto, inhaling the meal in 5 bites. I gave my pancakes to Zoo before Liam had a chance to. After some semblance of calm had settled back over us, He pulled his map up and spread it out over the wheel. The dashboard clock beside him said 7:25 a.m., and when he turned to face us, it was with an expression of determination I had never seen someone wear so early in the morning. "Okay, team," he began. "We need to get back on the right track. I know our last East River was a total bust, but we have to keep looking. So let's review the facts those blues gave us, Edo." It was only after a full minute of silence that I realized that was the extent of the facts. "We should have tried to bribe them for more information," Chubb said. "With what?" Liam said, setting the map down. They wouldn't take you, Chubbs. And you're our most precious commodity." Chubbs, unsurprisingly, did not find that funny. "Did they spell Edo out for you? Was it 1D or 2? I asked. "Because if it's an actual clue, that could make a difference." The two boys shared a look. "Well, crap," Liam said finally. I felt a sharp tug on my arm and turned towards Zoo, who was holding up her notebook for us to see. She had written the letters EDO. "Nice job, Zoo," Liam said. "Good thing one of us was listening." "And that was it," I said. The only other thing they coughed up was that if we hit Relaya, we'd gone too far south, and we had to beg for even that, Liam confessed. It was really pathetic. "They could have been pulling our legs too," Chubb said. "That's what irritates me the most. If East River is so great, why were they leaving?" "They were going home, remember? The slip kid." While they were arguing, I slipped the map out from under Liam's hands and squinted at it, trying to make sense of the lines. He had given me a very vague rundown of how to route a path from point A to point B, but it was still overwhelming. "What are you guys thinking?" I asked. "What theory were you working with?" "We ran across the kids right around the Ohio state line," Liam said. "They were coming from the east, headed west. If you add that to the other bit of DC and Relaya, the likely candidates become West Virginia, Virginia, or Maryland." Zeus said, "Edo is another name for Tokyo, but it seems a little far-fetched. He'd be there." "And I think it's a code," Chubb said. "A cipher of some kind." He sat up a little straighter, turning to face me fully. The way the smile spread over his face made me think of a natural documentary we watched once in school about the way crocodiles flash their teeth as they skim through the water toward their prey. "Speaking of codes, didn't you say the league broke you out because you were a world-class code breaker?" "Crap. I didn't say world-class." "Oh yeah." Liam's face lit with the most heartbreaking expression of excitement. "Can you take a stab at it?" "Double crap. I, I guess, I said carefully to keep my face neutral. Zoo, can I see the notebook again? They were all staring at me. They might as well have been sitting on my chest for how paralyzing it was. It was near freezing in the van without the heat on, but my body felt heavy with hot, sticky panic. I was holding onto the notebook like it was a prayer from heaven. I knew there were kids out there who could plug in a few dozen letters into their brain and spew out complex coordinates, or immediately spot a riddle hidden in a puzzle. But I definitely was not one of them. Chubb snorted. Looks like the league picked a lemon. Hey, Liam said, his tone sharp. We've been mulling over the damn thing for 2 weeks and have figured out exactly nothing. You can't give her an hour to think about it? Could I sub out the letters? Edo for numbers? 5415. God, what other kinds of codes were there? A railroad code? No, that wasn't right. Or was it not a code? That would make a hell of a lot of more sense, actually. The riddle had to be something that kids both in and out of camps could figure out, and it couldn't be too difficult, otherwise no one would ever get it. Lie, I thought, reaching up to smooth a stray piece of hair back from my face. Just a lie, just do it, just say something. What did 3-digit numbers usually represent? A price, a time, an area code? Oh, if I was right, oh God, was more like it. Oh? Liam repeated. Oh, what? I've forgotten. Well, I corrected myself. I could be remembering it wrong, so don't get too excited, but I think it's a Virginia area code. There's no area code that's 4 digits, Chubb said. 5415 doesn't work, but 540 does, I said. People sub out O for 0 when they talk sometimes, right? Liam scratched the back of his head and looked over at Chubb's. 540? Does that sound familiar to you? I turned toward Chubbs, suddenly seeing him in a new light. You're from Virginia. He crossed his arms and looked out his window. I'm from Northern Virginia. Well, that figured. 540 is Western Virginia, I explained to Liam. I'm not sure how far north and south it extends, but it should be right around this area, I think. I showed him on the map. I didn't just think. I knew 540 had been my area code when I lived with my parents in Salem. There are a number of cities and towns, but there's also a lot of undeveloped land. Not a bad place to hide out. Is that a fact? Liam kept his eyes on the road and his voice even, but there was something maybe a little too casual about it. Did you grow up near there? I looked down at the notebook in my hands, again, feeling something clenched in my chest. No, I didn't. Virginia Beach, then? I shook my head. Not any place you've been or heard of. I heard Chubb's tongue cluck as he opened his mouth to say something, but there was a sharp cough from the driver's seat. The topic had been dropped, and no one was willing to try picking it up again, least of all me. Well, it's as good of a lead as any. Though, I wish the area was a little bit smaller. He glanced my way. Thanks, Ruby Tuesday. A not unpleasant warmth rushed up from my center. Don't mention it. And if I'm wrong, I let the thought trail off. It was a good lead. With one last glance down the alley to make sure it was clear, Liam refolded the map and tossed it back into the open glove box. Betty came back to life with a low growl. "Where are we going?" Chubbs asked. "It's a place I know." Liam gave a one-shoulder shrug. "Someplace I stayed before." "The drive shouldn't take us that long. Maybe 2 hours. If I get lost, though, one of you Virginians is going to have to step up to the plate and help me out." It had been a very long time since someone had labeled me like that, as a person with a home. It was true. I had been born here, but Thurman had been my home for nearly as long as it hadn't. Gray walls and concrete floors had bleached out almost every memory of my parents' house, stripping away, first, the small details, the smell of my mom's honey-soaked biscuits, the order of the pictures lining the staircase wall, before going to devour the big ones, too. I used to wonder, at night, when it was quiet enough in the cabin to think, when I let myself get to the point of wishing for home, if the home in my heart was supposed to be the place where I'd been born, or if it was the place that was raising me, if I got to choose it, or if it had somehow already claimed me. The truth was, when I looked at my reflection in the window, I couldn't see any bit of the Ruby that had lived in a little white house at the end of the lane, honey sticking to her fingers and hair falling from her braids. And it made me feel empty in a way, like I had forgotten the words to my favorite song. That girl was gone forever, and all that was left was a product of the place that had taught her to fear the bright things inside of her heart. We passed exit after exit to Harrisonburg and the turn-offs for James Madison University, driving down a major highway with nothing more than a prayer that no one would pull us over. Wasn't exactly my idea of a good time, but for now, the risk seemed worth it, at least for the view. I loved the Shenandoah Valley, every inch of its gorgeous spread. When I was little, my parents used to pull me out of school early for a long weekend of hiking or camping. I never brought books or video games for the drive. I didn't need them. I would just stare out of the window and drink it all in. You know, in movies, the ones set in older times, when the shot freezes on the hero or heroine, gazing out over the forest or river, and the sun catches the leaves at just the right slant, and the music begins to swell. That's exactly how I felt as we entered the Shenandoah Valley. It didn't hit me until that moment, until the first glimpse of the gauzy blue mist surrounding the mountains, that we really were in Western Virginia. That if I stayed on the highway, we'd be 2 hours away from my parents in Salem. 2 hours. I didn't know how to feel about that. Liam groaned, pointing toward the temporary road sign up ahead, 81 closed, between Harrisonburg and Staunton. Use local roads. By 9 o'clock in the morning, We were finally deep enough into Harrisonburg to find its pulse of life. Here and there, we saw restaurants opening their doors to the morning lights. We passed a few older adults pedaling away on their bikes, balancing precariously on two wheels with their briefcases or bags, their heads bent toward the sidewalk. They didn't even look up as we passed. No JMU students, though. None that I could spot. Chubbs sighed at the sight of them, leaning his forehead against the window. "You okay, buddy?" Liam asked. "Need to stop and smell the scholasticism?" "What's the point?" Chubbs shook his head. "It's closed, like all the others." I whirled around in my seat. "Why?" "Lack of students, mostly. If you're old enough to go to college, you're old enough to be drafted. Even if that wasn't the case, I doubt people can really afford it anymore." "Jesus, that's depressing," I said. "The offer still stands," Liam told his friend. "You know I'm happy to break into a classroom for you if you need to sit in one of those cramped seats and stare at a whiteboard for a while. I know how much you like the smell of dry erase markers." "I appreciate that," Chubb said, folding his hands in his lap, "but it's not necessary." We passed what I thought must have been a black wrought iron fence, but it was almost impossible to see, trapped as it was beneath what looked to be raggedy patchwork blanket. It wasn't until we got closer that I realized what we were actually looking at. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of sheets of paper that had been tied and taped onto the fence or stuck between the thin bars. Liam slowed the car, tilting his sunglasses down to squint at them. "What do they say?" Chubbs asked. "I can't." Zoo only put her head back down and shut her eyes. They were missing posters with the faces of little kids and teenagers, photographs, signs whose wording had been smeared away by rain. The biggest of these being a banner that said nothing more than Matthew 19:14. It hung crookedly, almost like someone had tried to rip it down, only to have someone else come along and half-heartedly string it back up. The wall of faded paper took a beating as the wind blew through the fences, ripping some of the more decrepit sheets free and making other fluttering like hummingbird wings. And where there was room, we saw stuffed animals and flowers and blankets and ribbons. No, not missing, I thought. Those kids had been taken, or really were gone forever. Their parents and families were searching for them, posting their pictures because they wanted them back, needed them. God, Liam's voice sounded strained. Where did they say we could pick the 81 back up again? The ash trees lining the lonely one-lane back road were just coming into their lovely young skin, but in the afternoon light, their shadows couldn't have been longer. And that, my dear friends, is the end of chapter 13. Tune in next time for chapter 14. Ruby out.